Hey friends, this is a sad, disappointing video for me. Once again, Richard Dawkins screws up in a television interview, this time with Piers Morgan. His first mistake was appearing on a program with that loutish oaf and pandering to a lot of conservative nonsense without reservation. Morgan is a Catholic of the stupid flavor and argues with him that a failure of evolution is that no human brain can explain what nothing is. And it all goes downhill from there. I could dwell on the idiocy of much of the conversation, in which I'd mainly side with Dawkins, but I won't. I think Dawkins should have just walked out on the persistent fool in the first 5 minutes. I would have. Then they started on sex. I'll focus on one thing.
There are two sexes. You can talk about gender if you wish, and that's a subjective. I'm not.
But when people say there are 100 genders, for example,
yeah, I'm not interested in that. As a biologist, there are two sexes, and that's all there is to it.
That's not true. There's a lot more to it, but I can understand why he said it. Dawkins' reputation is as an eloquent science popularizer, but what he has been popularizing is a strongly reductionist view of biology, favoring a gene-centric perspective that was developed by Hamilton, Travers, Williams, Maynard Smith, and others. It is a valid and useful perspective that has been successful in answering some questions about evolution. Dawkins gives a great example of this view in the interview when he has to explain life's origin.
We know once you've got a self-replicating entity, which nowadays is DNA, but it wasn't originally, once you've got life started, once natural selection, Darwinian natural selection has got going, then we pretty much understand the 4 billion year history of what's given rise to us and all other living creatures. We don't...
He's not wrong. My objection was with that phrase, that's all there is to it. It's a gross oversimplification of both evolution and sex. He has to know that. And if we were pinned down on that phrase, something Piers Morgan is ill-equipped to do, he'd probably squirm uncomfortably and admit that it is a simplification, but a useful one. I'd add that it may be useful, but it's also incomplete and lazy. For example, there are two sexes, and that's all there is to it. I can see where he's coming from. That's a common view among many TERFs, gender criticals, who think it's a slam dunk argument to say there are only two kinds of gametes, eggs and sperm, and therefore there can only be two kinds of sexes. My problem with that is that it's incomplete. We're not sperm and eggs. We are not simply gametes, or even meat robots bumbling about with a small package of sperm and eggs, even if that is a metaphor I've heard scientists use. As a developmental biologist, the idea that there are only two sexes because there are only two kinds of gametes is nonsense. It's true that there are only two kinds of functional gametes in humans, but we are not our gametes. We are a complex multicellular organism. The moment of fusion of sperm and egg might be adequate for an extreme reductionist, but it neglects so many aspects of subsequent biological change and variation. Sperm meets egg, but we're not even close to being done. Months of differentiation follow. Even at birth, the process is not complete. Hormone levels, secondary sexual characteristics, maturation of internal organs, the brain, all are going to take years to develop. You might think you can peek in the baby's diapers and predict with absolute certainty their future role as a biological organism in human society, but you'd be wrong. Genitals aren't destiny. There are layers and layers of biological change that are going to occur, and all of them exhibit variations, sometimes in contradiction to previous layers of change. There's nothing counter to biology for someone to develop a female brain and a male body, or vice versa, or even to have a non-gendered mind. Dawkins is wrong. There's a heck of a lot more to it, and it's a disservice to developmental biology to claim otherwise. As an evolutionary biologist, I have to point out that while the properties of individual cells are part of the story, It's not the whole of it. Evolution occurs at the level of populations. The success of the human species isn't a matter of individuals producing gametes, but is all about groups of people with diverse abilities and specializations. It's not just about half the population picking up a spear and the other half tending the hearth. And by the way, neither of those occupations require the use of the genitals. It's also about the ones who dance, the ones who teach, the ones who play with nephews and nieces, the ones who make tools, the ones who weave baskets, the ones who remember, the ones who fish, the ones who provide mutual aid, the ones who compose poems, the ones who garden, and yes, the ones who hunt and the ones who keep the home. The human experience is all about diversity. The kind of reductionism Dawkins is promoting does us no favors and would only apply if we were asocial single-celled breeders, which, interestingly, is valid for most of life on Earth, but most of which, curiously, don't bother with the whole business of differently differentiated sexes anyway. So I've been seeing a lot of this particular kind of argument from the anti-trans folk lately, that there's a sperm and there's an egg, and therefore sex is binary, and therefore there should only be man and woman. It's wrong and it's irrelevant. People are not perambulating spermatozoa and ova, and you have to discard an awful lot of complexity and developmental history to pretend they are. We are all the products of elaborate epigenetic and environmental interactions that produce the variety of different human beings we see all around us. You can't ignore the significance of that, or the fact that it obviously creates people who do not uniformly fit into two stereotypical boxes. As a gotcha against trans men and trans women to deny their identity, it also fails as irrelevant. Trans men are not pretending that they have testes, and trans women are under no illusion that they have acquired ovaries. They don't even consider either of those organs to be essential to their sexual identity. They are usually more aware of the biology of sex than our conservative pundits, and for that matter, some world-famous biologists. Do these antis think that telling a trans person that they are formed by the fusion of a sperm and an egg would be a huge surprise that would shatter their worldview? Do they believe that reciting a trivial, basic biology fact would completely undermine the more sophisticated, thoroughly understood facts that go well beyond their grade school oversimplifications? As a former ally of Richard Dawkins, I would not go so far as to say we were close enough to be friends. I want to say one more thing. Richard, you're not going to restore your respectability by embracing thuggish know-nothings like Piers Morgan. That these are the only people you can find who will publicly agree with your unenlightened views on sex and gender does not make them your friends. They're just going to drag you down deeper into the cesspool of bizarre, radical conservative views out of the light of reason and truth that you've always said you valued, into a conspiracy of hate that is all about authoritarianism and doing harm to your fellow human beings. Stop now before your world becomes even darker. Well, that was no fun. Sorry. It's been disappointing to me to watch the atheist movement, which I once saw as a beacon of enlightenment to help guide humanity to a society of reason and justice and equality. Seeing it fragment into the same old sectarian selfishness and inhumanity that seems to dominate views of news and politics and religion. Despite the fact that I can get pretty dismal when contemplating the fate of atheism, do go ahead and click like and subscribe. Every tiny little bump in my numbers gives me a tiny, tiny little bit of hope. Tiny, I really don't attach much importance to channel statistics. It's there, but okay. You could also subscribe to my Patreon, patreon.com/pzmyers, which actually gives me a tiny bit of much appreciated material comfort. I've been posting about my research there, which, since it involves spiders, I've avoided putting on the front-facing free public blog at freethoughtblogs.com/pzmyers, just because there's a lot of people who get squeamish about that sort of thing. Anyway, I've been writing lately about my research, my lab research. I'm very excited about having discovered a couple of morphs in spider species I work with, and I'm looking forward to doing some genetic crosses this summer. You can help me with all that by joining the Patreon. Just like all these sweet people that you see, their names are scrolling by. Okay, that's all I wanted to get off my chest. Thanks for listening. Talk to you all later.